started with this webinar today. Welcome everyone to our Sasnet webinar on energy cooperation in South Asia today. And we're extremely honored to have three experts joining us from 3 different time zones. Dr. Mirza Sadaqat Huda will be presenting his book, Energy Cooperation in South Asia, that was recently published by Routledge. And then Dr. Huda is joined by Dr. Mohammed Maki and Dr. Sumit Vij. Thank you all for being here. And before I introduce you a bit more in detail, I'd just like to say a few words about Sasnet. We are based at Lund University in Sweden. We are a research network, and we basically aim to connect scholars that do work on the South Asian region, either based in South Asia or elsewhere, and we aim to produce different types of knowledge. We do this through publications, through seminars, conferences, and now due to the coronavirus pandemic, we shifted a lot of our activities online, and started to host webinars like this one today, which is quite amazing, because I was just saying earlier that this exchange probably wouldn't have happened without Corona, having all 3 of you joining from different places around the world. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers a bit more. First, Dr. Mirza Sadaqat Huda. As I said earlier, he is the author of the book that's basically in the center of this discussion today. The whole title of the book is Energy Cooperation in South Asia, Utilizing Natural Resources for Peace and Sustainable Development. And Dr. Huda is also a postdoctoral research fellow at the OSCE Academy in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. And his research focuses mostly on the Belt and Road Initiative, the politics of renewable energy, and global climate governance. And Dr. Huda is joined by Dr. Mohammed Maki, assistant professor at the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies at the National University of Science and Technology in Islamabad in Pakistan. And thirdly, we're also very happy to welcome Dr. Sumit Vij. He's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Faculty of Sciences in Vrije University, Amsterdam, and in the Public Administration and Policy Group at Wageningen University, both in the Netherlands. So thanks again for making the time and for being with us. Just a few last comments. This presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. So people can write their questions in the Zoom question and answer feature. And I'll also be checking Facebook at the same time, because this event is also live streamed on Facebook. And then later we will also publish the event on our YouTube channel. So whoever couldn't make it, or if you have other people you think would be interested, you can share the YouTube link with them later in a couple of days. But for now, I'd like to pass the mic to Dr. Huda. Mirza.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Good morning to everybody joining us from Europe, and warm welcome to everyone joining us from other parts of the world. So as Hannah mentioned, my presentation is on a book I recently published, Energy Cooperation in South Asia. So this book is essentially an international relations analysis on the geopolitics of energy cooperation in South Asia. But I tried to look beyond geopolitics as well, and look at it from a sustainable development and peace building perspective. So I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about the background of regional cooperation in South Asia. So South Asia is currently one of the least integrated regions in the world. Inter-regional trade in South Asia accounts for a little bit above 5% compared to the regional trade for the rest of the world. For a comparative perspective, East Asia and the Pacific accounts for 50% of inter-regional trade compared to trade with the rest of the world. So it is a very lowly integrated region. And it is also one of the most politically volatile regions in the world. I think most people are aware of the geopolitical conflict between India and Pakistan, but there are also various levels of conflicts that exist between India and the smaller countries of the region, such as Nepal, India has also had conflictual relationships in the past with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And there are also issues that exist between Afghanistan and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And all these issues have undermined regional cooperation. However, historically, the biggest challenge to regional cooperation has been India's reluctance to engage in multilateral cooperation. So India has historically preferred to engage in bilateral cooperation with its neighboring countries. So it has rejected all multilateral overtures to engage on energy, water, and other issues. However, in the last 7 years, there has been a reversal of this preference for bilateral cooperation. So India has actively encouraged multilateral cooperation between the countries of South Asia. And there has been some progress in energy cooperation in this regard. So around 15 bilateral energy projects are being undertaken at the moment, and 4 multilateral projects are at various stages of construction or negotiation. However, these projects are mostly still being constructed, or they are still being planned. So it is very important to examine this issue from the perspective of challenges and policy mechanisms to address these challenges to energy cooperation. So the main research questions of my book are what are the challenges to energy cooperation, and how can these challenges be addressed? So when I tried to examine the challenges to energy cooperation in South Asia, the literature review that I undertook only gave me insights into geopolitical challenges. So fortunately, I was able to do field work. So I managed to interview policymakers in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And I tried to find out what these challenges actually are, because within literature, geopolitics are only described in terms of the India-Pakistan conflict, which does not explain the lack of cooperation between countries such as India and Nepal, and India and Bangladesh, or India and Sri Lanka on energy issues. So through my conversation with policymakers in the region, I found out that political challenges are not only geopolitics, but it is about the failure of political leadership in multiple political realms. So, for example, domestic political leaders in South Asia often adhere to resource nationalism, particularly in the smaller countries of South Asia, such as Bangladesh and Nepal. There is a lot of aversion to cooperation with India when it comes to the development of hydroelectricity or gas. And the domestic politicians often they rile up nationalistic rhetoric about resources being siphoned off to India at the cost of the local population. So this creates a lot of negative perceptions about regional cooperation among the citizens of countries such as India and Bangladesh. And there are some other issues related to politics, such as extra-regional rivalries. So the rivalries between great powers have undermined cooperation in South Asia. For example, the US conflict with Iran has led to the shelving of the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. And currently, the geopolitical conflict between China and India can potentially undermine hydroelectric cooperation between Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal, because China also shares the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna River, where these hydroelectric projects are being planned. Thirdly, there are some basic problems of communication when it comes to energy cooperation. So one of the economists that I interviewed in Nepal told me that he finds it very difficult to communicate to Nepalese politicians about the long-term benefits of energy cooperation, because politicians are not interested in what happens 15 years down the track. They are more interested about winning the next elections 4 years down the track. So there's a basic lack of communication between technocrats and politicians, which is very difficult to overcome due to the differences in objectives. And lastly, energy cooperation is undermined by exploitative practices of domestic politicians. So countries like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan rank quite low in the corruption perceptions index. And the indulgence of corruption by politicians undermine the sustainable development potential of these energy projects. So these are the political challenges, some of the political challenges to energy cooperation. The two other groups of challenges that I came across through my research are the environmental impacts of transnational projects and the impact on human rights. And these two issues are not often discussed in literature on energy cooperation. So in terms of environmental impacts, when I spoke to Nepalese policymakers in regard to hydroelectric projects, they were quite adamant that Nepal must be compensated for any environmental harm caused by hydroelectric projects. If these hydroelectric projects cause environmental harm, then countries like India and Bangladesh should compensate Nepal for it. Whereas in India and Bangladesh, this perception was not there at all. So the Indian politicians and the Indian energy experts were only interested in paying for the electricity. So there's a basic misunderstanding and discrepancy in the cost and benefits of these energy projects when it comes to environmental impacts. And this can create a lot of problems in the negotiation stage of transnational energy projects. And lastly, in terms of human rights, within the domestic countries of South Asia, energy projects have resulted in grievous human rights violations. And these issues are expected to be magnified when it comes to transnational projects. So, resettlement, impacts on livelihoods, gender issues. These are all serious, repercussions of transnational energy projects, which has not been addressed within existing literature. In terms of finding out policy recommendations on addressing these challenges, I came across several perceptions by the people that I interviewed. So one of the first prerequisites for energy cooperation to be successful is that there must be domestic consensus within the countries of South Asia for the need of energy cooperation. So currently in South Asia, the opposition parties are quite adamant that energy projects will undermine national security. And so there is a need to build consensus across the political divide in countries like Nepal, in countries like Bangladesh, of the need for cooperation with countries like India and countries like Pakistan. And secondly, there is a need to contain spoilers of regional energy cooperation. So spoilers is a term that is actually given to people who are who have interest in undermining cooperation by Professor Mahendra P. Lama of Jawaharlal Nehru University. So spoilers are people such as religious extremists, certain ultranationalist political parties, people like businessmen who benefit from the lack of economic cooperation between India and Pakistan, people who rile up religious and ethno-nationalist rhetoric among the populace of South Asia. So there's a need to contain these spoilers from undermining regional cooperation which is very difficult to do in the current age of ethno-nationalist populism in South Asia. As we have seen in certain South Asian countries, the spoilers are actually have political power. So it is very difficult to contain these negative impacts on energy cooperation. Thirdly, there has to be consistency in supporting multilateral cooperation. So one of the energy experts that I interviewed told me that South Asian politicians suffer from collective amnesia in regard to multilateral cooperation. So in other words, they make all these grand statements about the need for multilateral cooperation at international forums, and then they go back to their countries and forget all about it. So there needs to be consistency in supporting multilateral cooperation over the long term. We see some support by the current governments in India, in Nepal, in Bangladesh, but a change in government can essentially undermine any kind of progress being made if there is not consistency. And lastly, transnational energy projects in South Asia has to accept international standards, such as the IFC standards as it relates to social and environmental safeguards, and some other international standards as they relate to human rights, such as the Human Rights Accord, the voluntary principles on human rights, on security and human rights, which can essentially protect the communities and the environment from the adverse effects of transnational projects. Other standards such as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and the Energy Charter can ensure that transnational energy projects are not undermined by corruption or unethical practices. So in my last slide, I would just like to share the main findings of my book. So I tried to categorize the challenges to energy cooperation in South Asia and look beyond simple geopolitical conflict. And to do this, I used a constructivist framework. And as most people know, constructivism is the idea that the world is not created of irrefutable facts, but is created through social interactions, particularly between agents and structures. So with that flexible framework, I categorized challenges to energy cooperation into 3 broad categories and several subcategories. And then I undertook case studies on 4 energy projects in South Asia. So I looked at 2 pipeline projects and 2 hydroelectric projects. Firstly, I looked at the Myanmar-Bangladesh-India pipeline, and I examined this pipeline through a conceptual framework on energy diplomacy. So energy diplomacy is traditionally understood as the use of foreign policy to secure energy resources. But I argue that energy diplomacy can be conceptualized as the use of energy to reduce conflicts. So in other words, energy infrastructure can act as peace-building mechanisms. The second case study was on the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. And here I used stakeholder analysis theory. So existing literature on the TAPI pipeline only looks at the security interests of the 4 countries involved in the project. And I argued that it is important to look at the stakeholder interests of a larger group of non-state and state actors. So it is important to look at extra-regional powers. It is very important to look at the interests of communities who live along the route of the pipeline. And it is through this analysis that the security and the defense-centric perception of the TAPI pipeline can move towards sustainable development and peace building. In the third case study, I looked at the Tipaimuk Dam, which is a controversial dam in India, which will have substantial environmental and economic impacts on Bangladesh. So I used the cooperative security framework to perceive the potential impact of this dam if we can move away from sovereignty-based analysis towards cooperation and mutual benefits. So cooperative security essentially implies that security is indivisible, and insecurity of one party causes insecurity for all parties, which is an antithesis to sovereignty-based approaches to natural resources. And lastly, I looked at proposed hydroelectric dams between Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal through an environmental peacebuilding framework. So environmental peacebuilding is a theory that suggests that cooperation on the environment can reduce political conflicts. And so I argued that electricity should be part of a broader perception towards ecological cooperation and peacebuilding. So in other words, the high politics of energy cooperation should be used to address the low politics of environmental cooperation, and thereby we can collectively address energy, water, and sustainable development, as well as peacebuilding in South Asia. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm looking forward to the questions as well as the comments by the discussant. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this was already a really good introduction into your work and your book. I believe that Dr. Maki is now going to continue with a few comments.
Yep. Thank you very much, Hannah. And how much time I do have?
Well, I would say around 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay. Anyway, it's indeed pleasure being here, and thank you very much. And I thank you, Dr. Huda, and also Swedish, this South Asian Studies Network for this kind invitation. I'm truly grateful. Let me start with a warning. I'm not an international relations expert or having such deep insights as, particularly from the regional perspective, as Dr. Huda or Dr. Sumit, the other panelist, carries. Primarily, my research interests emanate from sociological perspectives and deals with extractive industries in conflicts, and mainly in the post-conflict scenarios. And I try to understand that how extractives can become a key element in the post-conflict developmental agenda. In addition, I also look at the security development nexus and counterterrorism and counter-violent extremism related research. So please do allow me to intervene and comment from that mentioned academic and research background. And for the purpose, I have identified some very interesting thematic pockets or niche within the book. Nevertheless, whatever my comments would be, or the arguments which have been presented by Dr. Huda, I completely agree with them. One may disagree with the approaches he has adopted in terms of addressing the research questions or the overall research inquiry he is entangled with, but principally the findings comprehensively address the challenges of energy cooperation within the context of South Asia. So first, it's really congratulations, Dr. Huda, for this remarkable book, which you have published, which certainly, as you have just mentioned, looks beyond the mere idea of energy security and transnational cooperation in the context of South Asia. So this is a fantastic work. And I believe what emerges throughout the book and across the chapters very powerfully is that the way you have tried to explain that how natural resources and related infrastructure can be conceived or developed as an agent for peace and sustainable development in the region. So this is pretty novel. And the region we are talking about, which is highly complicated, deliciously complicated with different layers of conflicts and hostilities involved, highly contentious in nature, and entangles with many traditional and non-traditional security-related issues and threats. So it's a highly complicated region, as Dr. Huda was just mentioning. So, and these aspects has been to a greater extent mentioned very well in the book already. So, in addition, another aspect very interesting in the book is to observe the way the importance of regional and energy security has been well anchored on two main pillars, I would say. One, for instance, the issue of this carbon emission, where certain countries such as India are still struggling to kind of minimize its carbon emission targets. With regards, the argument presented in the book are highly convincing that through regional cooperation on energy fronts, and the term which has been repeatedly used and crafted, that through regional energy projects, that sounds more meaningful, as he mentions, Dr. Huda, such issues can be pretty much well dealt with. So, but I was wondering if we can place this broadly within the framework of human security paradigm. For instance, we have a key element of climate change within the South Asia. And to some extent, if I may mention the example of Indus Water Treaty, that Sumit would have a lot to say about it, which has been kind of effectively managing the transboundary water sharing agreement between India and Pakistan, though it's not energy related per se infrastructure. Nevertheless, a kind of mechanism between two countries related to natural resources in terms of water. And this water treaty since 1960s have been very effectively, to a greater extent, has been managing the water sharing agreements between the two countries' upper and lower riparian states. On the other side, two countries are highly vulnerable to the issue of climate change and related impacts. So we have to rethink about this Indus Water Treaty, for instance, from the climate change perspective. And that can be conceptually understood perhaps from the idea of climate proofing transboundary water sharing. So I'm trying to kind of think some of the key arguments which Dr. Huda has mentioned in his book from the broader human security perspective. So as a very important theme, he has repeatedly, or he has very convincingly brought into his thesis, is the idea of environmental security. Which he has linked with the regional dynamics and with the energy related agendas, which is also very interesting, convincing. And another point I would like to, let's not get into these details related to what kind of hostilities this region is, embedded within. The whole South Asia country. And this has affected, at least we can have this consensus that because of this division or these hostilities, a lot of possibilities or cooperations or which could be binded around the economic development or potential trade, etc., that could have been done. However, these possibilities or potentials have not been explored because of the contentious relationship within the countries in South Asia. So it is very concerning, as Dr. Huda has just mentioned, that South Asia, the countries within the South Asias are considered as the least integrated countries, as he has just mentioned. And the layers of conflicts, it's not between the countries, or there's another dimensions of intrastate conflicts within different countries, which then have a different kind of spillover effect on the regional dimensions also. So this is very concerning and very complicated picture within which the book has attempted to locate or contextualize the idea of energy related infrastructure for the broader peace building in the South Asia region. In this context, principally, it is absolutely viable that the energy-related infrastructure between the countries, the permanent ones, as Dr. Huda used this term, the permanent infrastructure, can converge the economies around within the South Asia, around the energy interdependence. So a permanent kind of infrastructure. So it's a kind of localizing both the security and economics around such permanent infrastructure. This sounds very promising. Another key pocket which I have picked from my angle from the book is the idea of energy security, which he has tried to frame. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Huda, that the way the book has tried to explain it is in a form of a non-traditional security threat. The issue of energy insecurity as a non-traditional security threat. And indeed, the vision of peace building within South Asia is not possible until the issue of energy and related infrastructures or existing or potential collaboration are being, being concerned as a matter of security between the countries and within the country, particular country or the state which is dealing with. And such accommodation can only be possible, I believe, if we have allowed the traditional notion of security to be further expanded into the idea of human security. So that's the kind of a space where we can really host or contextualize the idea of energy insecurity, which can become a broader part of the security framework. And it is, for instance, I can give you a few examples from the context of Pakistan. For instance, it is very unfortunate that the country like Pakistan, which has been really struggling in order to balance the energy demand and supply, which has been very well explicated in the book, and the country often have to shift its supply sources to alternate sources, such as recently the case of LNG, or so yet the energy security is not the integral component of the national security per se. And it's also very surprising that we do not have a national security policy, right? We do not have a national security as a policy available at the moment in Pakistan. So we've heard that the draft is, moving around. So we'll probably hear. So as the issue of climate change, which are usually in the developed context in the various countries, the issue of climate change is also an integral component of the national security. How the issues of climate change, for instance, within the Indian-Pakistan Indus Water Treaty, owing to the climate-related impacts, Dr. Sumit would be a lot better in terms of explaining that, how it can, intensify the issue of water between India and Pakistan unless we have not incorporated the notion of, climate change or considered the impacts of climate change on the Indus Water Security Treaty. Though on the other side, we have been very effective in formulating or revising or implementing the national internal security policies. We had two documents which were developed at the ministerial level, government level in 2014 and then in 2018. However, these internal security policies conceive the idea of security in a very traditional domain. That is to say, within the frame of kinetic measures, counterterrorism, counter-violent extremism, or we can conveniently say that security as being in the possession of kinetic measures or military, right? So we do have it. And these policies have been very effective in dealing or curbing the issues of terrorism and violent extremism or sectarianism, or, issues related to issues related to terrorism or security issues. And if I can further elaborate this a bit, with an example, that we are very well aware of the fact that most of Pakistan's natural gas is being sourced, or the supply is being sourced from the Balochistan province. And there has been an unrest there for quite some time, from the last couple of decades, in which can have multiple interpretations, but it is indeed embedded within the ethno-nationalism. And in addition to this, one thing is very much obvious in the case of Balochistan, is that the natural resources are kind of at the epicenter of this issue, or the presence of natural resources are triggering or facilitating or intensifying the conflict that is happening within the or the unrest that is there in Balochistan. So consider the violent geography of Balochistan, and then any possible energy infrastructure. As you've mentioned, the case of some of the communities' concerns in other contexts, from environmental impacts or other. But consider from more, broader security lens, if the violent geography of Balochistan and then any possible energy infrastructure in terms of conventional oil and gas supply, or which is binding the regional, countries together, and even think of any mega project pathological, perspective, that is to say CPAC, that is in fact riding on the back of the province Balochistan and has some, transnational complexion in it, of course. So in that scenario, when our internal security policy document, on one hand, it does indicate that how various structural determinants or development-related agendas are important in order to deal with the unrest or inequalities within these regions in order to bring harmony or deal with the issues or improve the state-citizen relationship. But on the other hand, these policies have completely ignored the significance of the province or the related context for the country's energy security. So what I'm trying to say is that though at a regional level, the idea of using energy resources for regional peace building sounds and has been proven to be very promising within the literature and other contexts around the world, without a doubt, absolutely. But the regional, these regional permanent idea of regional, these energy-related regional projects and their viability is highly dependent on a couple of factors. In my opinion, for instance, number one, countries' specific internal security and stability. Each country's, particularly the violent or more vulnerable countries such as Pakistan or the borderland or the peripheries. And it's very interesting to observe that the peripheries or the borderlands have very unique dimensions in the South Asia. In particular, the case of Pakistan, starting from the erstwhile Fatah till Balochistan. So it's very fragile and very unique demographic realities are there. So one, countries, we have to consider the country's internal security and stability situation, the more contextual one. And second, that how the energy security or whether the energy security is a part of the national security agenda or not. Okay, and then number three, then how, as you have mentioned about the extractive governance and transparency initiatives, and I completely agree with the fact that how these indigenous resources, for instance, if we have copper, oil, gas, gold, and other related mines, coal in Balochistan, so as in the Fatah, we have discovered significant oil and gas conventional resources. We have discovered significant copper, highly valuable resources in addition to copper. So we really have to have indigenous effective management or governance of these natural resources. So here you can see probably, I'm just about to finish that, you have both the micro and macro kind of highly intertwined with each other. This is something which cannot be ignored, and any kind of regional infrastructure which is highly promising, and it can really bind these countries together in terms of interdependence on energy and economic development. But you cannot detach these micro and macro level in order to have a more comprehensive understanding of how that would unfold. So, and I would like to hear more from you about the importance of this synchronization between the micro and macro when it comes to the idea of developing these regional projects. So that's pretty much it from my side, and thank you again for having me. I hope I haven't taken much time.
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah, I think Dr. Huda, I'll give you the chance to respond to this after Dr. Veech's presentation, which we are moving on to now. Yes.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Mirza. Thanks, Mohammed. It was lovely to hear you both. And what I must say is that also to thank you in a way to set a nice ground for me to speak about the questions of politics, especially related to water politics in South Asia. I'm going to now share the screen, and I hope it works. Now, what I've done is basically, especially with Mirza talking about cooperation, I'm going to go to the complete different end of the spectrum, talk more about conflicts in a way, or the politics of it, and why there is so much need of cooperation in the future, as well as in the current scenario when we especially talk about South Asia. The other element which I would like to touch upon is, because we're talking about energy, I think we're talking about this, we need to also talk about the source of the energy. And I think water is one of the key elements in South Asia, which is the source of energy and the demand which it needs to fulfill in the near future, but also in the long term. And these are the two elements which sets the nice ground for me to talk about more about politics, and especially about transboundary issues, because as we know, like, we have these nation states who have historical rivalries with each other for various reasons. But the natural resources don't follow those political boundaries, and they have their own sense of direction, which we have to kind of acclimatize to, also need to understand those things and then make use of it to meet our own demands. And that's where the question of politics emerges, of how we're going to look into it, and why is it important to look into these questions of politics and power in South Asia. To give a very general overview, I'm going to talk about three things which are really important, at least to my understanding. Is water is a very essential economic good. I'm particularly using the word economic good, but also in a way, the way it functions in South Asia, it is also a very key political issue, but also a cultural good. A lot of cultural aspects are around these questions of how culturally water is important to the people in South Asia. If you go to the northeast of India, you will see that even in Bangladesh, people living, they call it that people live in the floods, and they have lived for centuries around that. It's not about that it is good or bad, but that's how it has been, and it holds so much cultural value to it. Another important point is that the actors involved in transboundary water diplomacy or politics have very different interests. What I mean is basically these countries involved or are part of the region have very different interests. Just to give an example, what Mohammed was also talking about Indus, or on the other case, on the other side of the region, the Brahmaputra. If you look at China and India, they would have a completely different interest for the river. India wants to tap its hydropower potential per se. Same goes with China. However, when it comes to the lower valley in Assam in India, people use or depend on Brahmaputra for agriculture and fisheries, and same goes with Bangladesh. In my experience, I've realized that people in Bangladesh would say that because we have been living with floods for so many years or decades, it's okay to be with that, but not to be in the drought. And if we look at Brahmaputra River Basin particularly, it's one of the lifeline for Bangladesh. And this kind of notions create different interests and priorities. And that is the key underlying reason for creating conflicts. And sometimes it brings actors together for collective action. Some of the efforts which I could think of, or at least what Mirza also spoke about, this whole BBIN efforts on energy cooperation. That's one of the key efforts, bringing these different countries or nation states together. But also there are underlying conflicts, which we're going to also talk a bit more in the coming slides. The another aspect to this is that the current way of looking the whole diplomacy or the politics literature is essentially very power blind. I'm not talking about the conflict and cooperation literature. They do talk about it. But when we go to the whole angle of cooperation literature, we go about how diplomatically we can come together, how diplomatically we could find solutions. I think there we kind of get very power blind, or at least very power shy. And I think those kind of things do not look into the nuances or the processes where these negotiations happen. What goes on behind these closed doors or open policy circles, sometimes that is not being captured. So I'm gonna, basically what I've done is that looking at these questions of power or politics very elaborately, but also looking at what are the gaps and where we can focus in the near future. Now, talking about these power nuances and related questions, I think these are the certain nuances which I which are very prominent, or I think it's essential to understand when we talk about South Asia per se. One particular aspect which I really found it interesting is the questions around multiple hegemons. When we talk about river basins in South Asia, or water in South Asia, there is China, there is India, and when the two hegemons in the same basin interact, I think things get much more complicated, which basically what Mohammed was talking about, that it is essentially complex. And why is it complex? Because then when you have two so-called or self-created these as hegemons or as powerful nations, or want to create themselves or position themselves as future powerful leaders, then it becomes a much more difficult power game in the region to find cooperation. That's one thing, and leadership plays a big role in that. We'll also talk about a bit more in the coming slides. The other aspect is that the domestic conflicts or domestic emotions of the people has started to influence the foreign policy or the relationship with other countries in South Asia. Previously, I think the foreign relations as such was very sacred. That means it was a bit more technocratic, which was the downside of it. But it was something which was not part of the electoral advantage in South Asia. But in the last, I must say, last 10 years or so in South Asia, what has happened, the whole political or electoral advantage or getting the votes per se has taken the outlook of nationalism, populism, all these elements, which has started to influence the foreign policy also. Although, on the contrary, we could say that a lot of things happen in the back doors, which are done by bureaucrats or diplomats, but a lot of things do influence the emotion, are influenced by the emotions of the domestic politics. And that is also creating this problem. And also it kind of creates an influence of how domestic interplay influences the transboundary interactions or the nation states per se. The third element, which is very important, I think, which is happening across the world in some ways, is that this whole rise of nationalism and realism in the world political cycle is also influencing the water issues, or particularly water diplomacy per se. In the past, we were looking at least in the last maybe a decade back, we were looking at that how non-state actors were playing very important key role in negotiating. I think Mirza and both Mohammed also kind of expressed that, especially when we talk about India-Pakistan relationship or the Indus Treaty for that matter. In the 1960s, World Bank was very successful to bring these two countries together to come up with a treaty, which has done quite well, I must say, in the last 40 years. We went through, it survived with 3 wars between the two countries. I must say that it's a success story. However, that is also changing now. The 2018 negotiation between India and Pakistan failed for the Indus Treaty. And we don't know how does this look like in the future. So those are the questions which are emerging. And this is particularly because of the strong nationalism and realism influence on the world political cycles. There's a sense, which at least that's my interpretation, that this whole alpha male style of leadership and the transactional leadership is creating that kind of a problem in making those tough decisions. They are okay to take those tough decisions rather than looking for more congenial or more amicable solutions. Just to give you a perspective on this, the type of leaders that have emerged from Northern America. Of course, Donald Trump has lost the elections, but yeah, there are still very strong several leaders across the world who have kind of brought this whole notion of nationalism, and it is a key to diplomacy to deal with questions of water and energy in the world. Now, I'm just going to quickly give you a glimpse in South Asia of how India's recent relationship in the region has changed, and which is also influencing the water questions or the energy questions or the questions of cooperation per se. We look at it, one of the key examples is that relationship. Particularly what is happening is that it is going through a cycle of conflict, cooperation, and cooperation cycle. They have not been able to find a continuous cooperative relationship between the countries. They have failed to do that. The same goes with when we talk about case with Nepal. India had a very long-lasting friendly relationship with India, but yeah, from 2015, it has been going through its own ups and downs. There was a blockade from India, which created a lot of animosity, I must say, within the Nepalese people, and rightly so. I was there in Nepal when this happened, and I could see how difficult it was because the dependency on India was quite high. But that is also changing. So India is also lost, in a way, a friendly neighbor in the region. And these are the things which have created problem with the negotiations with the water issues, energy issues also. And the second, we all know about the history of India and Pakistan and its conflict, particularly related to Kashmir issue. And this particular element has taken a new direction after the amendments India's parliament has made in 2000, last year, particularly in 2019. And India is kind of making it as a more internal issue, but there is a conflict that Kashmir is not an internal issue, but more an international issue per se, because it makes a difference in the region. It doesn't only affect India and Pakistan, but it also affects its relationship with the other northern state countries like Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, but also Bangladesh in some ways. So these things do interfere. And then there is an influence of China over there. So these things make quite a lot of complicated scenarios for the near future when we talk about cooperation. The another element is that the current Doklam and Ladakh issue with China has been going on for several months now. And although both the countries are dependent on each other economically, we have found that both the countries have their own ways, or they do depend on each other for various other elements, except for water or energy or other issues. But this has not been able to resolve the water issues, or this has not been able to resolve the conflict between the two, which is particularly related to historical border rivalries. One example I would give, when the Doklam standoff happened, China stopped sharing the river data for the Brahmaputra River with India. And that itself shows how vulnerable the water issues are, particularly when these kind of problems emerges. Same could happen when India and Pakistan have these border conflicts or scuffles. There's always a sense we would know that Indus Treaty would be one point of discussion around it. Other neighbors in South Asia, like Maldives and Sri Lanka, are also kind of getting into a very tough relationship with India for various other issues. One goes with the political turmoil and the whole anti-India sentiment, particularly the comments from some of them made by the Indian politicians. South Asia had a very stable, I must say, network, which was SAARC. It still exists, but now India is kind of promoting other alternative platforms because they don't want Pakistan and China to have their more influence on SAARC per se. BIMSTEC is another one which is coming up, and Sri Lanka is not very happy with that. These are some of the key issues, which is also, although India doesn't share any water courses except for the Indian Ocean per se, but there are not direct transboundary rivers or energy issues between India and Sri Lanka, but there are other issues which have come up in the recent past, which have created some problem on that. Now, what I'm going to do is just give you a glimpse of what mature democracies have been doing and what evolving democracies have done, particularly related to their relationship with the neighbors, but also how does that influence the water politics itself. One of the key issues, if we look at European countries, some of the European countries which are very mature democracies in the world, they also like to trade it. Water, they position, like Netherlands has a very good relationship with Bangladesh. And what they do is that they sell themselves as a global water experts, and they help Bangladesh in various. So of course, there are challenges there also, but at least they're positioning themselves like that. On the contrary, evolving democracies like India, or I must say, China is a very different scenario in terms of not calling itself a democracy because of the single party rule. But they also want to position themselves as the global power or the South Asian power economically. And that becomes a bit of a challenge between the two types of democracies. In the Netherlands, a lower riparian can, especially when we talk about the Rhine River Basin, they acted as a basin leader. They came forward, brought other people together so that they can solve the water pollution problem in the Rhine. However, in South Asia, the hegemons or the bigger countries tend to behave more like a bully and rather than a leader. And I think that becomes a bit of a challenge. And it also doesn't allow lower riparian countries like Bangladesh per se to come forward and behave like a leader, because they have these kind of relationships which doesn't allow that. Another thing which I already mentioned is that we in South Asia, particularly, we do cater to domestic audience. I think that's the key focus when we talk about looking into these larger foreign policy questions. However, in the more mature democracies, I think they look more into the foreign audience. They want to position themselves as a stable democracy, as a mature democracy, and they want to build alliance rather than break the alliance. India's or China's, or even in Pakistan for that matter, they look for strategic autonomy. They want to make their own decisions, but they're dependent on each other and they don't understand those kind of nuances. They still continue to focus on that, and this strategic autonomy, what it has done in the recent past, has brought more conflicts than the cooperation angle. That also becomes a bit of a challenge. I think the mediation has become a big challenge in South Asia. In the past, the multilaterals, bilaterals like the World Bank and all have been able to mediate these things, but I think their focus, their power has also gone down in the recent past. And that has also created a bit of a challenge. Their influence has reduced in the region. And countries like India and China do not accept their solutions or mediations per se. Key example was in this discussion in Washington in 2018, which failed between India and Pakistan. I'm going to just quickly now summarize, and because we were talking about both conflict and cooperation, as I wanted to end my presentation or these questions with what Mirza was also talking about. I think we need to really move out and understand this, that the power play which happens, which creates these both conflict and cooperation, is influenced by domestic politics and electoral advantage. And it is influencing transboundary politics. I think this needs to be much more discussed, much more understood well, so that we, or alternatively, I must say that needs to stop somewhere, because if you're looking at domestic politics influencing your transboundary issues, you might never have good relationship with the countries, so-called, because we create these so-called enemies of the state, and so especially when we're talking about insecurity within the countries or tensions which are already existing in the countries. It will never allow us. I think we need to separate these two. Another aspect is that I think we need to move, and we have to also understand that these multilaterals like the World Bank and other agencies have lost their gravitas. We need to look for other alternatives now who can mediate these issues, especially in the region. And I think we need to make sufficient investments for that. I think partly the role is that people like us need to get into these policy circles to look for more amicable solutions rather than let them be the way they are. And that goes to my question of who are these next generation mediators? Who are these people who's going to take care of this? I'm sure we need more non-nationalistic leaders instead of alpha males as such. And some of the key examples I look around the world is Greta Thunberg, as she's still a child activist, I must say. But I think the approach they are following, I think it holds a lot of value in it. People like Jacinda Ardern, although she governs a very small country compared to some of the countries in South Asia, but I think we do need people like them in the region who could pursue these kind of directions, move us in those directions, and reduce some of these tensions and bring more cooperation in the region. I'm going to stop with this. That's a bit about, I wanted to speak about the water politics, which also relates to the issues of water cooperation. And yeah, happy to have the discussion now and answer the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think both of you, Dr. Maki and Dr. Vici, already made such great elaborations and arguments. Before maybe we start the Q&A with the audience, Dr. Huda, do you want to respond directly to a few of the comments that were being made?
Sure, yes. Thanks very much, Hannah, and thanks very much, Dr. Maki, for your very informative insights into some of the issues that I've raised in my book. So I've jotted down some of the queries that you've made and some of the comments that you've made. But I believe that it would be appropriate to say that the gist of your comments is about the synchronizations of macro and micro issues when it comes to energy cooperation. So yes, I think that's absolutely fundamental that macro and micro issues are taken into account when designing transnational energy projects, particularly because energy is an issue. The extraction, the transmission of energy has so many socioeconomic and political repercussions. So it's very important to look at the conversation of macro and macro issues. In terms of your comments regarding the importance of internal security of a particular country for energy cooperation to be successful, yes, I do agree with that. But I wonder if it's a bit of a chicken and egg question, because there is this perception that energy cooperation, or the more like the socioeconomic benefits of energy cooperation, can lead to some form of internal stability, which is in the case of say the peacebuilding perspectives of energy forwarded by people like Salim Ali and his colleagues. So I wonder if it's a bit of a chicken and egg question as to which comes first. Is internal security a prerequisite for energy cooperation to go through, or do we need to somehow get energy cooperation going, get the funds coming in, get the investments coming in for there to be some progress towards internal security? Of course, this depends on the framework you look at. I mean, arguing that cooperation and trade leads to internal security is part of a neoliberal framework. There's that criticism as well. And in terms of energy security being a part of national security, I suppose that in most countries of South Asia, there isn't an overt connection between national security and energy security on paper, but the way the governments act, I think it kind of shows that energy security is part of national security in terms of things like following or implementing projects that really make no economic sense, but make sense in terms of having access. So, for example, in Bangladesh, for a very long period of time, you had these power plants that were run on imported fuel. So this is a very expensive venture, and it makes absolutely no sense from the perspective of and the environment as well. But simply in terms of access, you can justify that energy is part of national security. So these are the sacrifices you just need to make. What is not explicitly part of national security is regional cooperation. So when it comes to national security, I think regional cooperation ranks at the very bottom. I guess it would be wonderful to see one day that SAARC declarations have some form of importance in the parliaments of Bangladesh or Pakistan or India, but I think we're far away from seeing such a scenario. So I think regional cooperation is not connected to national security at all, and I hope one day that there would be some form of overlap between regional security and national security. In terms of the importance of governing natural resources within a particular country, you mentioned the case of Fata and how there are these recent discoveries of natural resources deposits and the impact that the unsustainable extraction of this could have on local populace is of course important, but I guess this kind of goes back to the question of integrating the macro and macro issues through international standards. So if you are going to extract gas from Balochistan and say send it all the way to India, of course you need to consider the impact that this extraction would have on the populations in Balochistan. And I guess one of the ways, not the only one of the ways this could be addressed is through the building up of local constituencies who support our energy cooperation. And I guess if you want to look at an example, say the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. So this is an oil pipeline, and one of the ways that BP kind of got international acceptance of this project is they created a mechanism for the locals to make complaints about BP anonymously. And these complaints were then quickly followed up and rectified. And these complaints could be about oil spillages, about the company taking over someone's land and not paying compensation. So this is obviously a very micro policy mechanism, which has huge macro repercussions, as it relates to the success of a transnational pipeline. So yes, these issues that you mentioned are very complex, and they can undermine energy cooperation. But there are some examples around the world where there has been instances of the successful integration of macro and micro concerns of energy cooperation. Of course, you can say that the political challenges for the TAPI are so much larger than the political challenges for BTC. The Azerbaijan and Georgia are not in perpetual conflict with each other. But I think the idea is not to kind of perceive energy cooperation as creating a utopia, but rather than increasing the cost of conflict. So if we start from that point and we say that infrastructure can have enormous implications on society and environment, but there are ways to minimize the impact, and infrastructure interdependence can raise the cost of conflict, then I think we're kind of aiming towards something that's more feasible. And in that regard, I would just like to share with you a quotation from an interview I took with an expert in Singapore. So I actually asked him about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and I asked him about the social and environmental impacts of infrastructure development in Balochistan. And his response to me point blank was, infrastructure is the most corrupt initiative ever undertaken by mankind. So you can't expect that there will be no social and environmental impacts. So it's a question of management. And of course, for somebody like me who does not know as much about sociology as you, but is quite passionate about sustainable development, this is quite a confronting statement to make. But I think that's the reality, and I think there has to be a thorough investment into the planning of these projects to ensure that the micro and the macro perspectives are aligned. So yes, thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we can move on to to a few questions from the audience. I would like to start with one that's about transboundary rivers, and maybe just to clarify for an audience that's maybe not super familiar with the region and how this transboundary cooperation works. So the person's asking, for rivers shared by multiple countries, is there any sort of framework or legislation on international law based on which countries with less power can go to an international institutional court when there's an unjust distribution of water resources? And should there be a discussion over it? This question goes to all of you, but maybe Dr. Beach can elaborate.
Yeah, I can respond to certain level this question also. It's particularly because it's about the water, but also international law. There are legislations, absolutely. There is one at the UN level, which is about the water course. However, in the region, India, China, both have not signed it. They have kind of decided to not follow those legislations. Same goes with Turkey in the European context. They also haven't done that. On the contrary, there are, I must say, there are institutional frameworks per se. That's how I would say it, between the countries, like a treaty or a legislation. Like what we have between India and Pakistan. We have one between India and Bangladesh for the Ganges. We have two of them with India and Nepal. So there are multiple levels, but you have to understand that when we talk about Ganges, it's also a river which flows through multiple countries. It's a multilateral river in some ways, but the treaties are almost bilateral, which again goes back to what just Mirza talked about, the socio-economic benefits and the environmental impacts of different initiatives taken by different countries for their own interests and priorities. Now, coming just quickly touching upon, is there an international institution? I don't think so for water per se. There are any international institutions where you can go and talk about your conflicts or issues, but usually what happens is that there is mediation by external third-party mediation done when there is such conflict also, which has been a point of question, which I also made as a point in my presentation, that the power of these mediators have gone down. There are new actors coming in. I hope, I just hope that there could be more done on this particular aspect where they can take the direction of more cooperation rather than conflict.
If Dr. Huda and Dr. Mark, you want to add anything, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'd move on to the next question from the audience. It's about the MBI pipeline. On a possible MBI pipeline, it has been argued that it is not feasible mostly because of the cost. Is this the only reason, or are there reasons related to relations between the countries? And is the fact that Myanmar is involved in the BRI while India is mostly pursuing relations with the US a possible reason? Anyone?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, and thank you for joining, Dimitrios. Good to see you here. In regard to the MBI pipeline, there are several issues. The most important issue is the Rohingya refugee crisis and the way the Myanmar government has refused to stop cracking down on stop persecuting the Rohingyas, and also, you know, the government hasn't negotiated or cooperated with Bangladesh in bringing back the Rohingya refugees that are already there. So, in this context, partaking in a transnational pipeline is unfeasible. In terms of resources in Myanmar itself. So due to the shelving of the Myanmar-Bangladesh-India pipeline in 2005, China built two pipelines from Rakhine to, forget the name of the state in, I think it's Yunnan in China. So one was an oil pipeline, the other was a gas pipeline. And so there may not be enough resources for another pipeline from Rakhine. So there are some very practical reasons for not undertaking the MBI pipeline now. And I've mentioned these issues in my book. I've essentially looked at MBI as a failure of energy diplomacy in South Asia. And most importantly, as Dr. Maki mentioned, the borders of South Asia are extremely complex, and it doesn't get more complex than the Myanmar-Bangladesh border. So it's rife with not just the refugee crisis, but the repercussions of the refugee crisis, such as crime, drug trafficking, ecological impacts. So for example, many of the refugees would cut down trees to build homes because they don't have any shelter, which results in landslides in the Chittagong district in Bangladesh. So it really is not feasible currently to implement the MBI pipeline. And this is essentially mostly due to the relationship between Bangladesh and Myanmar, and Myanmar's continued persecution of the Rohingyas. In terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, I don't think that Myanmar's involvement in the Belt and Road Initiative has undermined its relationship with India, because India does have quite a good relationship with Myanmar. It is more concerned, I think New Delhi is more concerned about the impact of the BRI in South Asia itself, particularly the smaller countries of South Asia, such as Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So I don't think the Belt and Road Initiative, plays a big role in the MBI pipeline. But at this point in time, this pipeline, in my opinion, is not feasible.
Thank you. I think, Dr. Huda, you already mentioned the outcome of the US election earlier, and this next question is also pointing towards that. How do you think a Biden administration would affect the situation in Afghanistan and therefore the feasibility of a TAPI pipeline? And also on that fact, what would happen with the US-India relations?
I think actually Professor Maki would be better positioned to answer this question. He knows quite a lot about the Afghanistan issues, and perhaps Dr. Sumit can elaborate on US-India relations. But very briefly, in terms of the TAPI, it was essentially pushed as an alternative to the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. And the Taliban in Afghanistan have strongly supported the TAPI. So there has been very good progress in the construction of the TAPI. So it was inaugurated in 2016, and the Turkmen portion is already completed. Currently, the Afghan portion is being completed. There are some issues with the procurement of land in Afghanistan, but they're not considered to be important enough to stall the pipeline per se. Of course, a lot depends on the relationship between India and Pakistan, but given that the United States is pushing so strongly for this project, and also this particular project can be considered as an alternative to Turkmenistan's cooperation with China. So I dare say that there is a good chance that this project will get the support of the major political powers, particularly the United States. So I think that this project does have a good chance of being successful, but I will let Professor Maki deliberate on the question regarding Afghanistan.
Thank you, Dr. Huda. It's in my opinion, it's a big mix whenever you were talking about TAPI, and there are two again levels which need to be considered. For instance, the ongoing peacebuilding process within Afghanistan, the role of United States in it, the question very much hints towards it, and the role of Pakistan as a strategic player, the recognized role of Pakistan, its own vested interests, and the convergence of also Indian interest in Afghanistan. So the kind of relationship between India and Pakistan revolving around the ongoing situation, or the kind of ongoing settlements within the case of Afghanistan. So that is something which is a kind of decisive factor to be considered while considering or visualizing the future of this TAPI pipeline. In addition to this, once again, this pipeline, I believe, will go through the Balochistan province, right, Dr. Huda?
Well, apparently only a small part of it would actually go through Balochistan. Not as much, it wouldn't cover as much area as the IPI. The IPI was meant to go through a large part of
TAPI. Okay, yeah.
But it still does go through Balochistan.
It does go through Balochistan. And so internal dynamics within the Balochistan, until unless they get resolved in terms of ethno-nationalism, in terms of, as I've mentioned, our own internal supply related to natural gas from Balochistan. It's a kind of, you've used the term in your book, the securitization of energy infrastructure. So from military point of view, that securitization is happening, or it's pretty much there in the case of Balochistan also. So until and unless we have these internal issues gets resolved in case of Balochistan, for instance. So we cannot see a very promising, safe, infrastructure being in place until unless the case of Balochistan is settled. Though the government policies are there, but it's still a long way to go. In addition, the Afghanistan is a key passing, pathway from the Central Asia to then Pakistan to India, and let's see how this new regime in the United States step into this puzzle in Afghanistan, because during the Trump administration, frankly speaking, it was not being expected that things would get resolved, and they didn't. The peace deals are questionable between the Afghan Taliban and the other government-related partners there, stakeholders. So they're kind of pretty much not in place. And we have also actors within Pakistan, which to some extent can be labeled as a non-state actors, but it's a more kind of external dimension of militancy in the name of religion, which correspond with the ongoing situation in Afghanistan. So we are talking about a highly volatile region which will be hosting or passing through the pipeline from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan to Pakistan. And until and unless we have that kind of peace or kind of stability within that can ensure the sustainable host of this permanent infrastructure around which peace building measures can be erected between the emerging economy or the very strong economy of India, and then our own goals in terms of economic development in the case of Pakistan. So it cannot be. So it's pretty much volatile. I do not have personally that kind of hopes, positive hopes that in a very recent future this can be materialized.
But anyone, yeah.
I think I can briefly touch upon the part of the question on India-US relationships. It's a very interesting thing, and frankly, there are two opinions around it, as usually we have. One is a stream of thought which kind of say, who are kind of Modi supporters, and what they say is that because in the past, Narendra Modi and Barack Obama were at good relationship, and Biden was the vice president at that time of the US. So there will be a continuous effort towards that. So it would go in that direction, which will make the India-US ties very strong, especially now with China on the border, standing or waiting at the border of India. And that makes, and especially with the relationship between the US and China now, which is a bit sour, I must say, especially considering the economic benefits, there is a possibility that it would get stronger. On the contrary, people who are not a Modi supporter or not a Modi government supporter or more populist government supporter, they feel that there will be a pushback from the US in terms of all the issues of communalism which is happening in India. There might be a bit of pushback on that front, but then they also talk about the situation of Uyghurs in China, which is not being debated by other countries, especially they blame Pakistan of not raising those issues. So there are these multiple dynamics but looking at objectively, I must say, looking from the US perspective, I think the world political landscape has changed. In the past, US was kind of seen as the beacon of democracy, pushing democracies in this different world. That will not happen anymore. Particularly after the Trump administration, what they have done in the US. And Biden will be very careful in getting into the internal issues of the countries like China or India or Pakistan for that matter. So they will be a bit careful on that front, but they would really like to take care of or take forward the relationship with India in the near future. One example I would give that there was Biden kind of promised that he would look into this whole H-1B visa issues. Now, looking at the numbers, if there are 100,000 visas issued per year, 75% goes to Indians. And this is not just because that Indian wants to go to the US, of course they want, but also that there's a demand from the US-based companies to hire Indian software engineers to work there, because it's simply about economics. It's not just that they love Indians or something like that, but it's also about the economics of it. And that makes it viable. And so if Biden administration will revoke the current Trump administration issue on this whole H-1B visa, that would be a good signal for Indian administration to understand that they are supporting, there will be a good relationship in the next 4 years at least. I will not go into a lot of details of what could possibly happen. I think it would be, we will see what's going to happen, but I think there will be certain level of pushback, or there will be a negotiation around this issue of communalism. But considering this whole, looking at the advantages of how militarily they can strengthen India to take care of its borders with China, but also look at some of the economic benefits.
And allow me to add a little bit on the question, and also some of the comments made by Dr. Huda earlier. In my opinion, there needs to be, from a very sociological perspective, there needs to be a conducive environment within which, or around which, or through which you develop these kind of, mega infrastructure in a permanent fashion. Until unless you don't have that conducive environment, then it's not a, it's always a question of their sustainability, right? It would probably end up in a different kind of equation. And that conducive environment usually is noticed or observed or witnessed in a form of certain kind of stability. That's not an ideal situation. Nevertheless, it's something that can be called as stable environment. For instance, the kind of geographies through which certain kind of infrastructure has to go through or to be there. And there are multiple geographies involved in it. For instance, we have a certain kind of definition when we call a certain context to be called or labeled as post-conflict, right? So they can have multiple interpretations, but we do have kind of milestones which need to be ticked in order to pronounce a space as post-conflict or a stable space. Nevertheless, that space is indeed not an ideal space in terms of institutional infrastructure, in terms of state-citizen relationship, in terms of inequalities, in terms of development-related indicators, a little bit of unrest, etc. It is still fragile space. So then we can talk about one of the comments you made earlier, that it's a kind of a sequential, like where, for instance, security ensures development and development ensures security. And that is the space or a conducive environment where even the certain conditions are not ideal in nature. Nevertheless, these infrastructure having embedded and inherent socioeconomic benefits or impacts or positive ripples, they can then, be in that part of circle there. That kind of infrastructure is contributing towards not just the regional, but also the host community or the host spaces or the host geography. So they are, producing some impacts on them. But before that, we need to have certain kind of stability. For instance, at the macro level, for instance, in the case of Afghanistan, and also I could repeatedly point out towards the case of Balochistan. We do know, and you know very well more than anyone, that the kind of natural resources we do have in Balochistan, they're enormous resources, high valuable resources, precious stones, oil and gas reserves, enormous resources. You know the case of Reko Diq, what happened to that, right? And other mining ventures. Because we didn't have the stability or that conducive environment, and in addition to that, that governance extractive mechanism that you pointed out repeatedly, we couldn't do anything. So that is there, and it's a kind of, pretty tricky whenever we get into that debate. So that conducive environment is very important. So first deal with them, and then we can definitely think of these promising ventures in terms of permanent infrastructure, in my opinion, humble opinion.
Thank you. I'm just checking the time. We're basically at the end. Is there anything else that the other two, Dr. Huda, Dr. Veech, that you would add to think?
I just wanted to respond to Dr. Maki. Yes, you're absolutely right. There needs to be some level of basic stability. But interestingly, I suppose in terms of stability in South Asia, I don't know if stability is necessarily as much of an incentive for a regional leader like India to push for cooperation as is competition from China. So I mean, the huge push towards regional energy cooperation in South Asia coincides quite strongly with the time that the Belt and Road Initiative really took off. So I guess we're talking about two different things here. One is the political will of leaders to push for regional cooperation, and the other is the basic level of internal stability that is required for energy cooperation or transnational infrastructure to sustain at a viable level. But yes, I do agree with you that some level of basic stability is an absolute prerequisite for any kind of cooperation, transnational cooperation, to sustain. And so I'd just also like to thank Dr. Maki, Dr. Veech, and of course, Hannah. Thank you very much for hosting us today. I really enjoyed this discussion and conversing with you all about my book and listening to Dr. Maki's comments and Dr. Veech's presentation as well. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you all. It seems like we could continue this discussion for a while, but yeah, that just shows how much there's to explore. Yeah, when it comes to all the issues we touched upon. Thank you so much for making the time. And yeah, as I said, the video recording will be available soon. And yeah, I guess with that, we can end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thanks, Mirza.
Thank you so much.